Hey, Paul.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. Thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
I've been waiting to have this conversation with you for a long while. We've got to do some work together, and even though we managed to build a relationship outside of work, it's still most of the time we got speaking was in work and about very specific stuff. So I really look forward to the opportunity to learning more from you, and I'm sure there are so many other people who are listening that would appreciate that opportunity as well. Let's start with the simple questions. Who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
So, who am I? Well, I'll start with, I suppose, professionally. I'm head of operations and part of the leadership team at a company called WorkLife. We are a co-working provider, so hot desking, shared space, as well as private offices. London-based, but a couple of other cities in the UK now. What do I do with that? I suppose I technically look after the operations teams, the membership teams, and the sales. What do I really think I do? I suppose I see my role as a bit of a custodian of the business and also a facilitator for other people to do excellent work. And I, therefore, I'm sure we'll get into it, spend a lot of my time trying to serve others who are very skilled and very capable to achieve what they're looking to achieve. In turn, hopefully, that supports the business goals. Why do I do it? It's a really good question. I'm not sure I've been quite so self-reflective at a philosophical level, but I can tell you I enjoy what I do. I think I've come up through a hospitality background, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and I've always had a bit of a buzz about serving others and about curating experience, and I just see that within this, and I think what I do, what I see myself doing on a daily basis is having this wonderful opportunity to help support a really intelligent, exciting team and a really valuable business with some really good objectives to grow at a time of big growth, and that's always exciting to work on. So that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Tell us a little bit about your work in hospitality. What do you there in the first place?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. It feels a bit old-fashioned actually coming into businesses that are a little bit more tech savvy to have come out of a hospitality background, but there's something quite appealing in kind of, I suppose, a bricks and mortar business, which is what it is. I got into it by accident. I was at university. I decided that I didn't want to go and get a job behind a till somewhere to pay my way through. So somehow convinced somewhere that I could DJ, and took the reins on a couple of nights there. And then I realised that actually the real money was in running the events rather than just performing at them.
Just so you know, though we already have a relationship, when I researched for this interview, I couldn't find any DJ sets that you played, so good job.
There's nothing famous out there. I don't think
I found some really strange YouTube videos for some of the guests. They're like, oh my god, I can't believe it's still on the internet, but I couldn't find any of the DJ sets. How would you finish a night? What's
predated YouTube?
What's the closing song of a?
I don't know. I tell you what, without kind of avoiding the question, I played maybe slightly more, I suppose, music-led types of things, so indie nights, electro nights, that kind of thing, electronic music. So maybe less the Marvin Gaye finisher, and so maybe something a little bit more palatable. I don't know. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
What was the last thing you listened to that's not a podcast on the Spotify coming in?
Last thing that's not a podcast. I think, don't hate me, I think it was Justin Bieber.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm not, just to set the record straight, we're going back a long way here. I am not cool musically. I've probably gone completely the other way. I couldn't tell you what's number 1 or number 10, and I have no taste, as it were. I go off of what people around me are playing. I'm not the one in the office to put the playlist on.
Got it. So what's the last show you've seen?
TV show?
A live show, music.
Oh, last live music show. Oh my God. Might have been the Chemical Brothers, but we're going back a few years.
So it's been a few years since you've been to a live music show?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's terrible, I know.
Okay. Listen, I've got a bunch of tickets to music shows here that I won't be able to attend. So there's a few coming your way.
Send them my way. I've gone from getting out of bed at 10 p.m. to go and do these nights to getting into bed at 10 p.m. to get enough sleep. So quite the transformation, but I'll definitely take you up on that. I need to be educated again. I need to dip my toe back in.
Oh my God. It's a driving force. It's a driving force in my life. And okay, we'll get you back on the dancing circle.
You can be the tutor, and I'm happily going to be the student again. Yeah, I'm open to whatever you're suggesting.
So DJ,
that was the segue in.
Yeah.
I decided that yeah, it would be more interesting to run the events. And we actually started a little promotions business, I guess you'd call it, and we convinced some venues that maybe we could run an event for them and fill the venue. And for whatever reason, they trusted us on no track record and no evidence towards it. And it was myself and a friend of mine who joined on, and he could DJ as well, and he was able to do a bit of design work, and we essentially just formulated some club events and did pretty well and made a good little living through university. And it segued into doing something more full time. So I got towards the end of my degree and had no idea what I wanted to do in life, which I think is probably quite normal, but you feel like you've got all the time in the world, or certainly I did, and thought was offered the opportunity to come on board one of the businesses I've been working with, and thought that spending a year throwing parties, booking cool DJs, and helping people have a really great time was a good way to spend a year before I figured out what I really wanted to do. And that was the route in. And I think what attracted me to it beyond that really was I've always had a bit of a buzz for serving others, and I think being able to quantify success by the smiles on other people's faces and those following days and weeks where people are talking about the memories of that was a real buzz and something really stimulating, and it fed my passion to do that more. And I think that is how I understood the role. Going on from there, I sort of tried to take it a bit more seriously, moved out of the late night into something slightly earlier and gravitated towards London. I'm fast forwarding a few years here, but understood that I had a passion for standards as well and the quality. I didn't want to have the cheapest product on the market. I always found that very difficult. I wanted to trade at a price point where we could do something pretty cool. And so gravitated towards, I suppose, call it the premium sector within hospitality, but trying to provide a real level of service. And again, being able to work to a market that can choose what they want to do with their money and time, and being lucky enough that they've chosen you, and hopefully being able to match and then beat some expectations that are already pretty high in a very demanding, very saturated market. And that's what I saw as the challenge. I really enjoyed that. And I think that kind of carried me through my whole time, peaks and troughs of all, as with all roles and all careers. But that never really left me. And I still think I have that today.
So I would say so, because if you think about it, straight after realizing, okay, DJs, they have fun, but they don't get as much money. Your job was to sell out clubs or nights?
Just for the record, I'm sure some do. I was not good enough to.
Yeah, fair enough. Not everyone gets to be born at Tiesto. But, the second thing you've done is, okay, we need to bring people in. We need to fill that space.
Yeah.
And that had transferred and stayed with you even now. So filling the space is a part of
it's interesting.
You also said that they gave you the opportunity with no track records, and young people's motivation is the ultimate track record per se. There's this fire in your eyes, and you'll just do whatever it takes, and you won't worry about your title.
Yeah.
And you'll just get it done because you'll hustle. You don't have much to lose, and everything is a learning experience. So I'd say this is the best fuel. Anyway,
it's a really good point. I should also say we accepted a terrible deal to come on board. In hindsight, it was a lot of effort for not a lot of return, and it turns out you don't make a lot of money doing it.
Fair enough, but look where it led you. Look where it led you.
Formative experience.
Formative experience is it's a good name for it's another good name for a podcast.
There's a podcast. Yeah.
So from being a person who wakes up at 10 p.m. to a person who's in bed by 10 p.m.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I admire about you is you try to form, even in all that chaos that is operations, sales, and marketing, you try and form some sort of a linear routine. You stick to your eating habits. Every time I see you munching on a protein snack,
Yeah.
or you already know your competitions, your wake up, your training sessions, and I admire that. And I think it's when you're doing everything you're doing at the velocity and the bandwidth that you're required for, there's no other way. There's no other way to maintain a steady, high level of performance by doing that. So, that's something to be called out, because it's utterly amazing. And I'm getting ahead of myself here.
Well, thank you, by the way. Thank you very much for that. And
100% welcome.
if you wanted to go into that, because I think it's an interesting topic for all of us, that isn't something that comes naturally. Maybe it does for some, and it's certainly something that hasn't been with me my whole life, and it's something I've had to learn and continue to work on. But you're absolutely right. You have to get command over your time and your routines and your habits in order to hopefully be more successful and cover more ground and contribute more.
The last example is I texted you a couple of days ago when I realized you'll be coming to the show in the evening. I'm like, hey, so what whiskey do you like? Let's have a toast together. And you're like, oh, sorry, I don't drink. I'm like,
Don't hate me
okay.
for that.
No, I love it because I found myself wanting to not drink, and I don't drink a lot. I hardly ever do. But when it comes to social situations, I still give in. I want to be sociable. I want to be approachable. I want to have a good time. So I know that saying no to something other people would be, like, oh, okay, so this guy doesn't want to party.
That's also an interesting topic.
So walk me through it, because you're in a hyper social environment. Half of the company bonding is done around drinking together.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you maintain this level of outgoingness and sociability and stay true to the habits you want to form?
Talking specifically about drinking, let's take maybe as a starting point, and we can segue into in other areas, I suppose. Well, I will say that the team I work with, and one of the reasons I love the business I'm in and the group of people I work with are, number one, we've got some really incredible personalities. People are very honest and open and very much themselves at work. One of the things when we talk about work life, by the way, and I won't get into it too much, but it isn't about work life balance per se. It's more about removing the barrier between work and life, and this whole kind of putting on your work character all day. Tie goes on, suit goes on, knot goes up. You have to hide your personality all day, and then 5 o'clock, thank God, the bell goes, tie comes off, and you can be you again. It's removing that. So I will say one of the things that gives this context is the people I work with are brilliant people who are very honest about themselves and make me feel very comfortable to not have to hide things and pretend I drink when I don't, or eat the cake at the birthday because that's the right thing to do. So I'm in a really fortunate situation that is by design, I think, in terms of how the business has kind of our culture and how we set our stall out, that I feel very comfortable being me. That definitely doesn't mean I can't go and join in occasions. That definitely doesn't mean I can't take my team out. I try not to be any sort of a warrior in terms of drinking's bad for you, etc., etc., etc. I certainly not want to judge anybody else, and I see its value certainly in terms of, like you say, social and bonding. But I think there's other ways to bond. And I also think if you're an accepting group of people, then the drink in your hand isn't going to define that relationship.
I remember a few meetings we were together, and it'll be fair to say I was jealous of the dynamics that I saw between you and the people you work with. The effortlessness and how you share the stage and how you let them run the whole show and you're just there. You could be not saying anything. We stopped speaking about CrossFit and they're on the show for 55 minutes, and then we get 2 more minutes of CrossFit, and that was the meeting. And I was mind blown by that, and I don't think you could have done it if it wasn't for the support you were getting from your founding team.
100%. I want to say here, David and Elliot built an incredible business that I've been fortunate enough to join and be able to play a part in. And also, I appreciate this isn't so much, but there'll be some about work life and also sort of about my story, I guess. But Rochelle, who works with us in a role that spans so much, but a part of that is the recruitment piece. And if, maybe we'll talk about that more, that recruitment is so key to this. Between David, Elliot and Rochelle and many others, there's the efforts that went into recruiting this team. And I think you have to work very, very hard to make it feel that effortless. And a lot of people have done that over a long time. And there's a lot of synergy in terms of what we're looking for and who is a good fit. And it's very authentic. I think that's key. It's not forced. It's not a case of these are the 10 commandments, so we've all got to live by them whether we like it or not. It's these are the things we value and these are the behaviors that we'd like to demonstrate. Let's go and find people who agree. And I think that's come through, and hopefully that's what you felt, that the people you've met are warm because they're warm people and they like people and they're empathetic and they're caring. And that's because we've looked really hard for those traits in the people around us, and that's because we believe that's the way you should be, right?
Culture takes so much intent, and I'd want to learn from you more about that. And I also want us to talk about retention, because employee retention in the nightlife and hospitality probably one of the lowest.
Really tough, yeah.
And so you had to be a really great person to work with in order to keep people for another extra month or 2 months. And I wonder how that transferred into the work you're doing today. So maybe let's talk about that for a few seconds, because retention in the nightlife, what's the lifespan of an average waiter, dishwasher, shift manager?
It varies a lot, but you're absolutely right to say it is about as high turnover as you're going to get in a sector. I mean, I've worked in businesses where it was quite common that, you know, people wouldn't make it through probation, and you'd have a 60 to 70% drop off in that first 3 months. What you would see though, and this was an interesting fact to get your hands on, which is those that do tend to last quite a long time. And it says a lot about if you get that bit right, that first 3 months, and ultimately that's one of the big things I learned, is if you get that welcome and that onboarding right, you usually get rewarded in some great loyalty and some great work. I learned a lot from hospitality about retention, specifically as a subject, through a lot of trial and error and a lot of mistakes and a lot of witnessing good and bad as well. And I've worked for a range of people who I've learned a hell of a lot from regardless, but some of absolutely what to do and also some of absolutely what not to do. And I think all I can say is the best thing I did was probably take the time to notice and try to digest that and try and apply it in how I work. And I like to think I've taken on board some of that stuff and be able to apply it today. In hospitality, you rightly say, it's hugely competitive. It's big teams. There's a lot of challenges around the sector in general and whether people perceive it as a career versus a quick job to bring in a bit of extra income, and the whole concept of maybe being a low skill discipline or not a discipline at the basic level. And that potentially, what that does is probably attract a large pool of people who maybe aren't right for you in terms of their motivations. You know, we do, so referring back to work life, and one thing I think Rochelle in particular is incredibly good at is really try to understand if somebody's being pushed or pulled between roles. So when we look back at somebody's career journey, did they move into that role because they were pulled toward it, because the business reached out to them and said, you are incredible, we really, really want you, or because they were passionate about the cause, or because it was a great development experience for them and the natural next step in their career, or were they pushed towards it because they're just not very happy in their previous role and they just wanted to change, you know? And it's trying to get into the detail of things like that on the recruitment front, again, to find the right people that are motivated in the right way. I think once you've got people who are motivated well and there for the right reasons, and again, behaviorally aligned, and I talk about behaviors more than values, because I actually think it's what's tangible is how you demonstrate those values through your behaviors. Then hopefully you're onto a good start and you're starting to form a decent team, and then it's a really, really good attention to that new person to help them feel comfortable. And you hear, I mean, I'm no expert on culture. I absolutely don't want to portray that. I kind of picked up what I picked up and have a bit of a sense of a philosophy around it for me. But I think you hear things about, you know, phrases like job design and organizational design and things like that. I think they're really important in the sense of if you can create a job that's pretty easy to train and you can get really good at training it, and you can hire people who are the right people, then hopefully you can put them into a role that they feel really confident doing and they therefore enjoy more because they're likely to be more successful in an organization that's designed to support them to be successful in that role. Hopefully they're going to stay longer. And that's, I suppose, how I see retention. And you have to work really, really hard to put that together.
What you said about being pushed or pulled into a role really resonated. And I'm wondering how many of the people who have that all of a sudden realize, actually, I'm in a role that I've been pushed to. What advice would you give to people who now realize they're actually not where they should be?
Yeah, tough one. And I suppose the answer is it depends. There are probably practical reasons why someone is in a role. We've all been there, I think, is another thing to say, and also pushed from roles. I think ultimately it matters that you feel engaged by what you're doing every day. Think about, you know, mentioned reference the 90,000 hours quote, but ultimately think about the fact that 5 days out of 7, you're, you know, for most, is what you'll be dedicating to somebody else's cause. I think it's really important that what you're doing is something you would want to do, you know, whether you were paid or not, to a point. You know, appreciate maybe we wouldn't all get out of bed at 6 a.m. for something that we do every day if we weren't paid to do it. But to a point, you're engaged in what you're doing and you care about the outcome and you care about the people you're doing it with and for. And if you're not feeling that on a daily basis, as I say, there are other factors. I think that will be a hard thing to sustain long term. And speaking again, only personally, when I found myself in that situation in the past, and I certainly have done, inevitably it's only gone one way. It's just a matter of time. So I suppose the best advice I could give is perhaps call that early, if that is the way you're feeling, and start to seek something out that would engage you on a daily basis. Because I think you need to love it to be good at it, and you need to be good at it to be successful at it.
But in a world that admires resilience and perseverance and hustle porn, I mean, it's hard to say when I'm in the wrong place versus I just need to power through until times will get better.
100%. And that's a really good point. resilience and perseverance are great traits, but you need to be resilient in the right areas, and picking your battles is also a really good one. You can persevere to climb the tallest ladder in the world, but if it's taking up the wrong building, then you haven't gained anything. You've actually lost a little bit. You've got to come back down to climb again. So I think it's understanding that you can be resilient, and you can just as easily make the right choices and decide what you're putting your efforts and energy and resilience into isn't the right direction for you, and course correct and go again.
So I guess it's about managing an investment, but instead of financial, it's energetical.
It's one good way to look at it. That might be an interesting way to think about it in order to be more objective. I often use the thought process of, if it wasn't me and it was somebody else that was asking for advice, what would I tell them? And that takes a little bit of the subjectivity out of it. And I find that useful for me. Mm-hmm. And I found it useful sometimes when speaking with my managers about how they would deal with certain situations or address certain decisions. If it wasn't you and you were giving advice to a friend or someone you trust, someone you care about, what would you say to them? And if you'd say different, then perhaps you should take your own advice.
Yeah. What's interesting to me in speaking with you is that your priorities from the get-go were very clear. We met when I was working for Jolt, and we just set off with our B2B proposition. You were 2 months in or so into your role, a super big job, operations, membership, and sales of a growing business, months before launching a second business line, being the first person in the company to do your role, at least in that scope. And we were meeting about a learning and development program for your employees.
Yes, yeah. Really, priority one, virtually.
You say that, and you showed up like it's priority one, but in 9 cases out of 10, this is not priority one. Who supported you? Was that part of your initial expectation management with your managers coming into the role? Because when I look at operations, membership, and sales, I see a million things that are burning here, and talent is not one of them. So how do you get culture to a point where it's that important that you actually put it, you don't even write it down because this is the first thing anyway. No one has to dispute it. It doesn't need to be written on a wall to be the number one priority.
I think the simplest way to answer that is I felt an incredible sense of alignment to Elliot and David, and I work closely with Elliot in terms of this side of things. So certainly, especially Elliot, in terms of the fact that we both are completely agreed that we're people, and we believe that success is through exceptional people. And if you have that as a cornerstone of how you think about organizations, and by the way, huge sports fan, love to reference sports and things, and I often try to bridge sporting success and sporting organizations and business organizations. Not always perfect, but often. Again, the manager isn't on the pitch. It's the 11 players, it's football, on the pitch that are going to do the work. And it's not 11 players individually, it's 11 players as a team. So it's about delivering through others. And that then leads to the next thought, which is, well, we need others to be exceptional. We need to help them. And our job is to serve them. And I don't know whether this comes from my hospitality background and that kind of service mindset, but I very much see the core of my job is to serve the people that I'm responsible to. And again, my philosophy as a leader and a manager is that I'm responsible to these people more than they are to me, to help them be exceptional, to help that role flourish. We got to teach them some stuff, and I think it's also about being pragmatic and looking at the picture. My first month or so and beyond, and still was about learning where work life was, the journey taken so far, the challenges. I like to ask people about what they would change if they could, what's frustrating them. Do
you get honest answers?
I felt like I did. I felt like I did. And again, I think that speaks volumes of the culture there in terms of people feeling they can be themselves and be honest, and there's no reproach. And I wanted to know what people felt wasn't happening for them, what was maybe what blockers were they up against to feel like they were succeeding and thriving. And there were multiple areas that came through, sometimes clearly and sometimes less obviously, but you could kind of read through the trends. And I think ultimately the answer is we could support a lot of this. Some of it was in org design, some of it was in behavioral stuff that we put in. Some of it was in the ways we communicate as an organization, the ways we collaborate with each other. And some of it was in about growing mindset and skill set, particularly in soft skills, transferable skills across the team. So I suppose L&D being the full phrase for it, very high on the agenda. One of the other things that we discussed early on, and I think Elliot was really aligned with and really pushed me on, which is great because we felt the same, was when you start a small business, work life is now 4 to 4.5 years in. when you start a business, you start yourself, and then you start to bring on people to support you, and you offer them a job, and the job is designed to fill a need because it might be outside of your skill set, or you just don't have the capacity anymore to support all of these areas and juggle all these things and keep all the plates spinning in this growing business. So you hire people into a job role, and they're bought into the mission. I think that there's something sexy about startups, particularly at the moment, and this generation of new employees, I think, want to be part of something they can believe in and be close to the mission and close to the core, and all of that's very attractive. As you grow, I think there gets a point where I've been doing this job now for a year, 2 years, 3 years. What's next? And you need to be able to offer more than a job. You need to be able to offer a career ultimately and a path. And I think that's, for me, was a huge piece, and still is, of the work that I felt was most important to enable everything else.
Yeah.
Because if the membership team aren't engaged and the sales teams aren't engaged and the facilities teams don't feel like they can climb that ladder enough to try hard enough to be proud to have a hugely high standard and have a sense of urgency, then they're not going to deliver, no matter how skilled I think I am as a manager. So we were multiple strands, L&D being one of them. It was about creating and stretching it from what was a job and something that you could do for maybe a year or two and then move on into a career path. And could someone spend a significant amount of time with work life still growing every day, every week, every month, every year, whatever it is?
We had a recruiter on the show, Ellen Donnelly, and she said that it's a quote, it's a Reid Hoffman quote, the founder of LinkedIn, and she said that his philosophy is you need to prepare people for the next role.
I like that.
This is your job. And you didn't say it quite in the same words, but you're behaving like that. Because when we were talking about an L&D program for your team, what you cared about is the career progression. How is a negotiation class going to help them get to their next role? How does a management without authority get them into their next role? Like, so it's constantly top of mind because it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you realize, kind of like the young person's motivation that you had as a young DJ, like this cannot be replaced. Financial gains are an alternative energy source only to an extent.
100%.
So
there's a whole piece around external and internal motivators, and which are more valuable and sustainable in the long term. And I don't think financial incentive plays a part, but I don't think it's the be all and end all that some businesses lean on. But yes, absolutely. And to your point, teaching negotiation skills to a team of people who don't need them yet and maybe will at the next level, so that when they arrive in that role, they arrive ready to do it, That's
very, very foresighted, because you join a company, especially first going startup land, your role is drastically different 6 months in.
Yeah.
Without the title being changed.
Yeah.
It just changed because the business changed, because the market changed.
Or get thrown stuff.
So you need to get that. You need to help people be prepared for a future that is uncertain.
Yes.
Is that a conversation that you guys have, or is that an understanding that already exists?
I think we're past that stage a little bit. I would describe us more as a scale-up than a startup now, although, as you said, we launched a new business within the business, which is kind of a startup in a scale-up, so there's some relevance. It's another whole thing. But I think what we have worked hard to do and are better at is probably defining roles a little bit clearer and putting some structure around that. We've taken a few courses of action. For instance, we have embedded a kind of a progression framework to give people a better understanding of kind of where they are on their journey, I suppose what rung of the ladder they're currently on, and also what steps are available ahead and sideways and left and right for them.
Some companies, sorry to interject it, because some companies would use career progression ladders as a control measure, not as a motivator. Basically, sorry, I can't give you a raise because this, and this has not been ticked yet. And knowing you're coming at it from a different place. It's like, this is a motivation. This 100%. Is strictly a motivation piece. You can go about it as fast or as slow as you want, but this is what the next stage looks like.
Yeah, you've got a great you've got a great backhand. Now let's teach you to serve. You want to be better? This is what that looks like. Let's work on that, and it's understanding what the next steps are, and it's helping enable managers to be better at giving focused feedback to people that gives them something to work on to get to that next step.
How do we put that in if I'm a young employee, I'm working in a startup, I've joined 2 or 3 months ago, I came in to do community, the role had changed, my manager had changed, the priorities have changed. How can I take what you're implementing as a best practice and turn it into an advice? What would you say to folks who are kind of floating in a very fast-paced environment, and need some guidance?
I would say, firstly, progression frameworks are appropriate at a point of business, and maybe in that scenario it's a little too early. But one of the things it does do is protect from that situation. Changes of managers, changes of stimulus, changes of business pivots in another direction. What that gives you is a bit of consistency into, this is what the role looks like, this is what's expected of that role, and here's what the next step looks like. So you could go through 6 managers, and if they're capable managers, they should be able to pick up where the last person left off. And it's kind of more the onus on the manager to make sure they are delivering as a manager. And I think that's how I see that. At that earlier stage, maybe you don't have that framework. I think it's okay that things move around a lot. I think that's part of the excitement of working in a startup. And I think you need to be ready for that and prepared for that. I'd say you have to, if you are somebody employing somebody into that environment, just be really clear and manage expectations and be upfront about the fact that that's the environment they're coming into. There will be those who love the fluidity, love the excitement of the changes of direction and picking up new stuff. I would fit into that. I love the idea of taking on new projects and challenges. I get bored if the goalposts don't move every now and again and new things come into the picture. But there are those who really need structure and things to be more systemized and need to be very clear for a long period of time. Here's what I'm here to do, and here are my goals, and this is what success looks like. So I think you need to be clear in the recruitment phase and bringing people on board that are comfortable and will thrive in that environment. And if they won't, perhaps they're not right, or perhaps you need to create a more structured setup for that person. That's very individual.
So on the recruitment piece, super critical. When I hire, I use a scorecard. We agree on what's important for that role and what the company is looking for. For example, my last company were looking for professionalism, so how good you are at doing the job.
Yeah.
The second thing was coachability. Like, we needed people with a mindset that they know that they don't know everything. Or the CEO used to call it intellectual humility.
Nice.
Like, I know that I don't know everything, and I'm here to learn.
Yeah.
Which is, if you don't have that, you don't survive in a startup. And lastly, it was about cultural fit. Cultural fit could be used as a double-edged sword. One is to bring in people like you, and the other is to disqualify people who you don't want but can't really put your finger on what is going on. Now, you're describing a membership teams. Yeah. It's not exactly sales, and they're not. I mean, how do you structure your recruitment process to look for those very specific, highly identifiable human traits that are also very hard to quantify?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm interested to know, in your process, if I could, you talk about culture fit. Did you have a definition to what your culture was, and therefore who would be a fit and who wouldn't?
So we tried to break it down. We looked for startup experience.
Yeah.
Because first day in a startup, if you don't like it, you know, and you're out of there very, very quickly. So they need to have done it and liked it before. That's number one. Number two is people who have extracurricular interests. So they can't be just work. We need that extra flair. We need people who are more rounded, that are passionate. Third thing, which I picked from LinkedIn, is a track record of excellence. People who would identify what excellence looks like and will aspire to get there. We'll talk about that when we talk about your high standards. Like, walking with you to a cafe is it's a fun experience. Not for the people working in the cafe, but we'll talk about that. I don't know if you realize what you look like when you go into one of those places.
I probably don't.
So this is what we looked for: a startup experience, a track record of excellence, and a passion that shows out. If we had those three, we're like, okay. I mean, they have to be able to work in a gender diverse environment and that stuff. But I think that kind of goes without saying.
Yeah. So how do we design it? Our process starts with a phone call, which is an element of screening, I guess. And what we're trying to get to initially is what you call cultural fit. It's probably a similar thing. We have quite a clear set of values. We've done some work on values to include behavioral statements, which is something I was really passionate about. I think behavior more than value is what you want. How does it live? Because people can interpret values in multiple ways, and you need to make sure you're aligned. So a bit of a cultural screening is where we start. Like I said, an understanding of whether somebody's being pushed or pulled towards a role. What are their motivators? What type of person are they, as much as we can gather? The next stage would be that we would meet somebody in person, and what we like to do is go through their career history, but we do it in a chronological order, which I always find really interesting. So you kind of go back to a point in time in the past in their career and just walk their journey with them. There's some science to how we do that, but ultimately I think it's quite a useful way of just understanding people's movements, motivations, touching on the things you talked about. How successful were they? What did success look like? How did they quantify it? What did their team think of them? We do a lot of questioning around team and what people thought, and we are very robust in terms of speaking to people.
So what would be an exemplary question?
We like to know who you work for. We like to know what they would say about you, or what they will say about you when we speak to them, because we will. We like to know people that work for you, what they will say about you, people you worked alongside, how they describe you, what they would have fed back in terms of strength, but also how they would have expected you to develop over time. You know, are people humble enough to take that feedback? Are they self-perceptive enough to understand that these are areas they can improve on? Are they people that people like to work with? And do they like to be around people? It's always interesting to hear people talk about their team. I've also found it interesting before to hear someone pretty normal to say, what would your boss say of you? Less normal to say, when I speak to that person who worked for you, what will they say about you? And it's interesting to see how people react to that. We also test it with our team, and we like to make sure people that interview with us, especially the ones that we like and go further in the process, meet a lot of people. And I think that's really key. One of the key traits I'm looking for is empathy, and somebody who is a people person and is warm to people and enjoys people. And one of the best ways to test that is to put them in the mix with a lot of different people. One of the steps we've included for membership is coming in and spending some time in one of our spaces with one of our teams. And that is generally to come in and work with the team, meet them all, meet members, interact with people. And we're assessing, you know, we're looking at how they interact, what do first impressions look like, who do they spend time with, what do they do when they think we're not paying attention, you know. So we're testing that empathy. And even between that, body language. Does this person smile? You know, are they naturally, do they feel a warm person? Would I like to hang out with them? Do I want to know more? Am I interested in them? Are they interested in me? So there's a few tests that, and let's say there's more science behind that. And then as a third stage, then we look at competencies. Then we look at the
competencies
skills.
come
the final
then.
stage, yeah.
And is this the process for even entry-level positions?
Mm-hmm. There is a slightly streamlined process at the most entry level, but ultimately the thing that gets streamlined is the competencies, because we expect that person probably hasn't had a lot of career experience, but we're just as robust in terms of cultural fit, coming in and trialing with us and talking a little bit about their experience so far. That experience might be small. It might be some time at university. It might be some volunteering projects, but we still want to have that. So yes, we do streamline it slightly at the entry level, but it's the competency bit that gets streamlined, not the rest.
That's amazing. That's also very rare. You've gotten into tech or the ecosystem at a senior level. You've already had enough of a background, or not enough, but like you've done things. You're professionally, you're sound. Is it tempting for you to give more people a break? Like, will you be receptive of people who've never worked in tech before more than others because of that?
Yeah. Yes.
I asked that question in the worst possible way.
I don't know if that is because I have segued in from another industry, or whether that is a contributing factor. But yes, is the answer. Here's an interesting fact. Firstly, we are kind of in tech. I kind of think of us in various areas. Ultimately, I still see it as a hospitality business. And again, that might just be my perspective because of my context on it. But what you might find interesting then is that we have, of the membership managers we've hired, I think currently none of them come from a background of being a membership manager in a community, in a co-working business, in a relevant field. They come from other industries, every single one of them. Most recent, more senior hire, I hired our amazing person, Yana, who heads up our sales in the co-working business, who came from a sales advertising background, has never worked in co-working, not familiar with it. We didn't go to the property company, we didn't go to other co-working businesses, and we intentionally hired from outside.
I want to pause here for 1 second, because you have an especially lengthy hiring process, even for entry-level jobs. And what helps you, and you hire people often who haven't worked in that profession, role, industry before.
Yeah.
So that's very true to the hire slow part of the ethos.
Yeah.
And what I think where you make up for the time is in culture. Because culture teaches people how to behave in a less direct way. This is how we behave. This is how we handle conflict.
More than that, it does. But like I said, it is less a guide of this is how you must behave, and more a tool for us to go, let's find people who already behave this way. And that makes it very easy, because you're not having to adjust or learn how to fit in. You already fit in. And I think that's what's interesting. So, Yana's a really good example of someone who is an incredible fit for our team, and that's just been proven with her time with us. I hope she won't mind me saying all that, but there was no teaching you here's the culture. It was, you are right for us. We want to work with you. We want to be around you, and you're going to be an amazing fit from day one. So I completely agree with you, but I think it's less about here is the Bible on how to behave. It's, you are already behaving in the right way. So be you and continue to reinforce that and bring that to this role. And that being so key, right? And like you say, that's the bit we don't have to necessarily onboard, as it were.
So what's your advice to people who are outside of a certain industry and want to break into, let's say, tech?
I'll try to give some advice. I don't know how, I obviously have had the opportunity to do it. My story was that I was sort of fairly comfortable moseying along. I was working in a business that I loved with some really great people. And, I will say that in my last hospitality role, and this kind of came out of the blue through a mutual connection with Elliot. And it ultimately transpired that I felt this was a great move. And, it was a case of hopefully felt like being called, in the sense that I was quite happy, and this has made me even happier. So I suppose I was lucky. And they were also consciously looking for somebody with that hospitality background. So that helped. I think the best thing I can say is understanding that a lot of the skill sets now that I think people are really starting to value are the soft skills and those transferable skills that are very general, that work in a lot of contexts. So try and think about, beyond what your specialism is, what is it that you do that can apply everywhere? So for me, I think that would be the service piece, the standards. I hope I'm a good manager and good leader, and work hard on that and try to be a coach to others, less because I know their game better than they do, more because I hope I can trigger the right things and create an environment that they will do well in. And for me, those skill sets are transferable to whatever sector, really. They're not defined by sector. And that isn't about my knowledge of food and beverage in that market. So I suppose the best advice I can suggest is think about the skills that apply everywhere, or across broad ranges, and really double down on those and be excellent at those, and develop those within your workplace if you can, within the organization you're in. But if you have to take it into your own hands as well, do so. If you enjoy it and you're passionate about it, follow that passion, read, listen. Everything's so accessible these days. Paid for learning, it still absolutely has a place. But even if you're not in a position to do that, there's so much out there. We're all listening to podcasts on the tube every morning, and to the point of too much food for the brain.
Too much food.
And I've just actually myself had to take a little fiction break just to break it up. But there's so much out there between what's online and podcasts and YouTube and anything else. You can really learn a hell of a lot on your own back before investing in it any further. So I think if you can get really great at those things, hopefully people will take notice. It will take a type of person who's open to it. Not everybody will have that mindset that they will take somebody, and sometimes you are looking for something specific. I can say even within our organization, there are roles where it has to be fairly specific. We hired a workplace designer recently. You had to have a background in workplace design. That's a very skill set role. We hired a product manager. You had to have a background in tech and product management. But there will be plenty of roles out there that are looking for those broader, transferable, softer skills, as they're called. Yeah. Softer by name, but not by nature, because they're the things that really allow you to flourish. And actually, you can learn the hard skills of a role. You just have to apply yourself and learn. It's not that difficult, depending on the role.
Soft skills, it sounds like the name discounts.
Undermines it.
It undermines the importance of it. So when I was working for Jolt, we tried to rebrand soft skills into personal impact skills.
That's nice.
Because persuasion is an impact skill.
Which is applicable in ultimately pretty much any role you're ever in, and most settings.
Yeah. So it's just a different way of thinking about those things. What is about you that makes you loved by the people around you? What do people call you for advice on? And once you start mapping and identifying those patterns, you can pluck a skill out of the things that are already happening in your life, and these are the skills you'd want to bring forward when looking for a job.
100%. You have this stuff, and I think everybody is developing these, whether they realize it or not. It's maybe just bringing them to the front and be more conscious of them.
So you had to go through a pretty steep learning curve. Yeah. You had those skills, but you had to learn a new business, a new industry, working with 2 founders, and cover 3 disciplines: operations, membership, and sales. Who mentored you, taught you, brought you in?
So I work closely with Elliot.
What's Elliot's role in the company?
So, Elliot and David, the founders, have a kind of rough division of labour that David generally works on new business. He manages the property teams, the marketing team, looks at new potential locations and the front end, where Elliot generally focuses on the business as it is and operating and running the business that exists. That's a loose split. They obviously involve themselves in both. But I suppose in my context of running the existing portfolio, as most of what I do, Elliot is my line manager and is the person I work with the closest. So I suppose he's the closest to a mentor bringing me into that. But I think, and this suits me really, really well, and I don't know if it's just Elliot being incredibly intuitive or good fortune, but he left me a lot of room, a lot of freedom to find my own feet and find my way. He was not afraid to share feedback, and he was not afraid to guide and direct, but it was very much trust of, here, you're intelligent enough and you have the capacity to do this role well. Go and figure it out, work out what you think you need to focus on. The role, obviously, we discussed what he would be wanting. I see that as a bit of a, what does success look like for you? And that's hidden in that job description, and you understand what you're there to do ultimately, and that's the contribution you need to make. So there's your masthead, and stay close to that. But ultimately, he gave me room to figure it out. And I don't think our business is overly complex at the core. We take leases on larger spaces and longer leases, I guess, and we break that into smaller spaces with more flexible time, and that's what we sell. So understanding that model isn't too difficult, and understanding that it's an experience, and this is something that Elliot really was very clear on, that it is a hospitality experience, and that's one of the things that hopefully differentiates us in the marketplace, and really applying that. And that is my background, so that was quite straightforward.
I'm not sure people understand you kind of discounting the complexity of your space, because everyone knows about WeWork, everything that went down.
Yeah.
So that side of the story, a failed IPO, disgraced, and I'm doing like a quote unquote a CEO and founder that was kicked out. Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
The other part is the day-to-day reality of setting up a location and having a competitor set up just across the street from you, and then giving people 1 year free on their lease just so they go into their space instead of yours. Like, fine, there's the business model, but there is that level of day-to-day complexity to it.
Yeah, perhaps I was more resilient to that because that's kind of the hospitality game too. You don't see a bar or restaurant without 100 next door. That's pretty normal, and undercutting people is normal, and offering better deals is normal, and a pint of beer is a pint of beer to a point. So what price are you going to go for? And for me, that was really normal. That kind of very aggressive landscape is something that I was really used to. I don't feel it quite so much in co-working. I think maybe hospitality, food and beverage hospitality is as saturated as it can get, and this is why some people are really have had some tough times. So perhaps I wasn't so sensitive to that. I think you referenced some different business models, and the interesting thing about the WeWork story is that they will now have to compete fairly with everybody, and they'll need to make money, and they weren't. Yeah. Their model was set
capital as a strategy. This is where it ended.
Yeah.
Injecting money into a business that doesn't stand on its own two legs got them to where they are. Was that part of your professional history mentioned in your hiring process?
The kind of competitor landscape? No, it wasn't. And I think that tallies with what I think of how Elliot and David see the business too, which is, I think there's a really good focus on what we're doing. And it's not it's not head in your sand, let's not care about everything else out there. It's certainly not arrogance. It's more humility than arrogance. But we have so much that we know we want to work on, and so much we want to improve on in our own business, that's our focus. And we tend not to take too much from other providers or worry too much. We're aware of what's happening, but worry too much about what others are doing. And our general principle is, if we can really do what we do well and understand that the market is maturing, and again, referencing the hospitality market in this, that's a mature market. The difference between a Bob Ricard and a Wetherspoons. You understand segments in the market, and you understand that price point follows segment, and the experience and your expectations change. And you understand that there is a difference between a restaurant that is offering a fish menu versus a vegan menu, and you're expecting different things. The same is true of co-working. It's just a young market, and people maybe who haven't experienced it don't know that yet, but they will, and they'll experience, and they'll get a little bit more savvy, and customers will choose what they're looking for at a more intellectual and a more niche level. So I think for us, it's about understanding where do we sit. And this goes back to the favorite comment. This goes back to believing we're a space where we can help teams be happier than maybe other environments. And it's really trying to lead the way in the things that we feel are really, really valuable and really, really important. And that is our focus. And ultimately, we're hoping that will be what distinguishes us. And that can't be too defined by what others do because they're different. And I think there's a really good set of operators in this industry. More joining all the time. I went to a wonderful co-working space, not afraid to talk about them, that the Hoxton Hotel have opened in Southwark, and I'm a big fan of Hoxton from my hospitality days. They've ventured into it. I think they're going to do a really good job.
It was already, the Hoxton hotels were already a de facto co-working space.
Pretty much.
You'd go in at 9 o'clock in the morning, you're surrounded by laptops.
Yeah.
People are taking up desk space over a cup of tea for 8 hours.
So they've just formalised that and stuck it on the top 6 floors in their new Southwark hotel, and it's lovely, and they've done a very good job, and I think they'll do well. But they offer a very different product to what we do, and I think that's key, is to focus on what you, and maybe this is applicable to people with their own businesses that might be listening. I don't know, but really understanding what you do well, and also understanding what your customers want the most, because you can't be amazing at everything, and it's okay that there's that triangle of. I think in the product world, there's a triangle of quality, price, and speed. You can have 2 out of 3, but not all 3. You can't have a cheap product really quickly that's of amazing quality. And it's the same in service, which is that you need to decide where you're going to be really great and focus on those things and be the best at those things. And that may involve sacrificing in some other areas.
Service in the co-working industry, you're working with startups, you see a lot of companies. And service also means being very empathical when companies go bust, when they have to close shop.
Yeah, it's a difficult area. Like I said, we really put a huge focus on empathy. One of our values is around being really personal, which is about personal service and a style of service, but also building relationships with people. It's a business, but I feel like our team's certainly having a really close bond with their members and their community. So it's hard hitting. And I think all I can say on that is, of course, we're a business too, and we have to operate, and we have to survive, and we have to have policies, and they're all well laid out and very, very upfront. I think we're good at being very clear and very transparent about what we're offering, and that has generally served us very well. And there's also within that got to be some empathy and understanding. So all I really can say on that one is that we hire great people who are intelligent, empathetic, and have a high emotional IQ, but also understand their goals and the business goals. And we empower them to make smart decisions. And not every situation is created equal. And we try to be as human as we can.
You empower your team much of what you were empowered with, decision-making power, putting the customer first in that regard, and I appreciate that, and I think it's something that's really missing in the commercial world. The innovation ecosystem is, we rely on one another. It's a kind of like a self-sustaining community in a way. Talent moves around very fluidly between companies. Founders who have started a company are, most likely to start another one eventually. So playing the long game here is huge, and it's crucial, and it's good to see something like that as well.
It's playing the long game, I suppose, commercially, but more than that, it's just trying to be good humans, and trying to do the right thing. And the right thing is also includes protecting work life, but it's also about trying to really understand the situation from everybody's point of view and try to create an outcome that is the best balance for everybody.
Let's talk about empathy now. We talked about empathy in the team. We talked about empathy in the customer. I want to talk about empathy and managing up. First, maybe before that, what was the hiring process for you in your role? Because I think it will answer some of that questions I have there.
High level, it was the process I've talked you through for all of our roles. Obviously, I didn't know that at the time. I feel like we've iterated, and I hopefully have contributed some extras to that since then, but ultimately it was that process. I started with some really good conversations with Elliot over the phone to sort of, I suppose, litmus test that synergy on both sides.
Was there already a title in discussion?
Yeah, there were a couple of titles, and I saw a few different pieces of paper with a few different titles on it, as I think they were figuring it out. But ultimately, I think we agreed on the sentiment.
So it's important because the first iteration, the first offer you saw, the first whatever email that came in said one title, but this had moved, and you had to be tolerant for these changes as you were figuring it out on your own.
Oh yeah, completely. And I don't think it's changed what the roles look like. And I will say that I've never really been too interested in all of that. At one point it was a general manager title, and it became a head of operations title. But ultimately, it didn't change what the role was for. It didn't change the scope of the role and the expectations on the role.
So what was the importance of title in that regard?
For me, nothing. For the business, for Elliot, I suppose, and those hiring, I think ultimately in my previous role as an ops director with a hospitality company, my reports were called general managers. They were general managers of their various restaurants and bars, and I think it was just not underplaying the role in my mind because it's a title I was used to managing. I think that was it. But the title general manager in a context like work life is a different thing. So I think it was more to, I suppose, defend against my ego.
Yeah.
Which luckily I don't think I have.
The titles matter. The roles stay the same, but the title mattered because we're telling a story here, internally and externally. So I think that's a key part. I think sometimes titles in job negotiations get a lot of attention for the wrong reasons.
Yes, agree.
Partially because people want to tell the story, but the story is not the title you come in with. It's the work that you get to do.
Yeah.
And can't emphasize that enough,
Here's my issue with titles, maybe in terms of my example, that the best I can give is taking a title like operations, head of operations. A lot of it's about what people think that word means. What is operations? And it's a specialist role. I don't think of myself as an operator. And also, on the other side of the coin is everything's an operation if you want it to be, right? So where does the land lie? And I think that's where titles can be interesting in terms of just avoiding confusion. I do see myself more as a general manager in terms of how I go about my role. Hopefully that's what the expectations are. I see myself, like I said earlier, as a facilitator of other teams to be great. I try to think about how teams work together, how vision is shared, how people feedback and collaborate, and how to enable others and how to remove things that are stopping them getting to where they want to be. And I spend much more time on that than operating. I will take responsibility when it comes to how we logistically deliver the product, but that's a very small part of the role. I'm
smiling. People who are listening to us can't see the smile, but I have a notebook here with my notes. And first question that I've marked was, who are you? What do you do and why do you do it? What's the second question here?
I don't know. Your writing is really scrawly. What is operations?
Exactly. This is what it says. It says second question is what is operations? Every company has operations, but no one has. There's no clear cut answers to that, and I think this is where titles could probably skew some judgments. What is heads of? Does that mean that you are COO? Does that mean that you where does that go? I think it's a bad conversation. A few weeks ago, I was in the process of looking for work, and I was approached by a startup, and initially they approached me. I was still employed, and they approached me, hey, how about the role of a COO? And I'm like, you 5 people. If they're offering me a COO, this is still the CEO's job. Everything is CEO job. COO now doesn't feel right. There's not enough going on. So I'm like, okay, I didn't say anything back then because I was still employed. A few weeks later, when I'm speaking to them again, they're like, oh yeah, about the COO, yeah, it's no longer that. We realize we don't need one. I'm like, thank God, thank God. This is the CEO's job. You do that, and then we'll figure it out. And when we were in more advanced conversations, we realized, I'm like, listen, guys, let's do a list. Let's just create a list of the things that need to be done in order to get the company to the seed round, okay? Forget about the title. Let's see if what needs to be done matches my skill set. I don't mind the title.
100%.
Let's just see that I can get this done. But I had to be confident of what I can do in order to have that conversation. In other roles, I was like, so does that make me a director? It's a point of maturity, but the advice here would be, I guess, super general would be, forget the title. If the work itself is the work that you want to be doing, and this is the work that gets you to your next stage in your career, go with that.
I think value is what's important. What value are you bringing the business? And that can take any form, really. there'll be areas that it's right that you take the lead in because you'll be brilliant. And there are areas that might traditionally have sat under that role, but you might have to be honest and say, actually, this isn't my area of expertise. This person over here is really well set out to do it. They'd love to do it, and maybe they should take the lead. And actually, that's a much better set out for an organization than saying, well, no, it falls under marketing and you're head of marketing, so you need to do it. And I think that's the way I've interpreted it. I think about what contribution, what value can I bring? Where can I be useful? If it feels right that I should step forward, I will. And if it feels like it's not a strong area for me, I'll try to be honest, but also try and be proactive about finding a team of people or curating a group to achieve it that might be better fitted for it. And I think that's hopefully, if you're in an organization that allows for that. And the other thing about titles is say, it is important depending on context, you might be in an organization that it unlocks doors or allows you to have conversations that you might need to have. So I suppose that's where the compromise is.
Fair enough. I remember moving into LinkedIn, I had to take a step down because, this is the company structure, going into a bigger organization, and it looks like a step down, but I was working with bigger budgets, better customers. So it's all context dependent. We're going to skip the question about what is operations because I think it's really broad and it's hard to extract value from it from a broad audience. But what I do want to talk about is partnering with founders. Startups, the relationships that operators, executives, professionals have with the founders is critical. You hire people at a professional capacity when the company reaches a critical mass of success.
Yeah.
And that is a point of inflection because you bring in people to execute your vision, but you bring them because of who they are and what they've done professionally. So there is a balance between giving them the autonomy and the decision-making power in doing their job well, but there is the other side of it, which is how well are they executing my vision?
Yeah.
Not just how well are they doing the role. And I'd love to hear from you about your experience in that position and what created this really tight relationship that you have with the founders.
Sure. I wonder whether it's interesting for you as well, depending on who you've spoken to, but obviously coming from the perspective of someone who is employed by the founders as opposed to the founder themselves.
Yeah.
I would say I'm fortunate, and I've referenced that already, in working for founders who not only give me the space to perform the role, execute the vision, but also help form the vision. I think that's really key and feel invested in that. So I feel that responsibility. I think that's good hiring. That you want to bring in people, I guess, who understand both they're capable of delivering their job, but also capable of moving towards the vision and the bigger picture. And I think that's got to be captured in the people that you put into those roles. And I think being able to think at that level and think that strategically is part of a role like that. But then you also need synergy, you need trust. I think you need to feel trust. So speaking from my perspective is I need to feel the trust that Ellie and David think I've got a grasp of it, and they're happy for me to maneuver without needing to know what's happening every day, every few minutes. And I think I feel that certainly in my environment.
How would you gauge trust?
In my world, I have regular contact with both of them. I don't feel like I'm reporting in. I feel like I'm sharing my story a little bit and what's going on in the world. I feel like I'm leading what I'm working on with their contributions. And I think that to me is an environment where I feel that trust. I think if you didn't have the trust, I would imagine it's the other side of that, which is what are you working on? How is it going? Metrics, KPIs around things. This is how I want it to look. Can you deliver on that? And I would imagine those are the conversations you would be having in a less trusting environment. Does that make sense?
It does. And when you're not being trusted at work, you would know. But stopping for a second and realizing, hey, I'm being trusted is something that requires, I think, a second of attention and some gratefulness. Because if you're trusted to execute someone else's vision, you have the power to make or break it in a certain way. And you need to also stop and say to your manager and say, hey, thank you for trusting me with this.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right to bring up the gratefulness. I also think you need to feel the pressure of that. I think that's healthy. And you also have to have some confidence in yourself that you can carry that burden, that responsibility, let's say, that you are carrying somebody else's vision over the finish line, hopefully. And you have to be comfortable with that and believe you can. Also, if you believe you can't, you need to say something about it. I think that's only fair. But you're right. It's something that it's perhaps you don't notice until you don't have it.
Yeah,
and I
100%.
certainly do. So
100%. When you lose that trust, you would know, and I don't think there's a way back. So if you're listening and you feel trusted, take a second to be grateful for that and acknowledge that trust, because it comes with a big responsibility.
We talked about retention earlier, and we live in a world where it's very easy to kind of think the grass is greener. It's very easy to access through social media or whatever, and people kind of don't forget people are highlighting the best of what they're doing. It's certainly not the worst of. And I think if you are in such scenarios where you have things like trust, that's super valuable, and don't discount that too readily because somebody's offering you $2,000 more to around the corner.
That's huge. What makes you a good partner to your founders? Now, I know asking you that is a tough question because it requires a bit of boasting, which I know don't like doing, but you're an unbelievable enabler and facilitator in that regard. So what are your skills and traits that make you good at not of your job of operations, but at your job of supporting the founders?
Yeah, good question. I enjoy working on what we work on first and foremost. I think that's important. I'm a self-starter. I like to come into work every morning and work on things. I get excited for that. So I think that puts me in a position where at least I'm hopefully raring to go and to take on that mantle. I think in terms of supporting them, I think I'm a hard worker who can produce a lot of output. I learned that in the hospitality world. I learned that from certain people and in certain companies where they were pretty cutthroat, pretty ruthless, and that bias to action was incredibly heavy.
Bias to action.
Yeah, which I think is a really key thing that people to kind of think about, and I like to see demonstrated in the people in my teams. But I think what that means is I'm able to support them by executing, and I think that's a big piece because founders often are visionary and have a real ability to innovate and create and think about ideas. Perhaps one of the ways I can serve is to take those ideas and turn them into real, tangible things. So, okay, how are we going to deliver it? What does it mean in practice? How do we implement that into the business that we've got? What impact will that have? What are the consequences of that? And try to turn it into something that actually makes a difference to their organization. I think that's something that I enjoy doing, and I particularly enjoy working on problems with Elliot. When I say problems, we're very lucky in terms of not really having problems, but working on innovations and working on new ideas. And I think that's probably one of the main ways I can support them. I'm really passionate about people in terms of people ops and organizational design, and also behavior within an organization. I think that's something I just have found I enjoy a lot. And I think there was a need for that, particularly in terms of where work life was, and is still to a point in its journey. It had grown very quickly, and a lot of the organizational systems, ways of working and thinking that had served it well to that point, and processes and were now a little stretched at the seams, because what works when you're 2 or 3 spaces doesn't necessarily work when you're 10 spaces and you're now national and you have grand visions of doubling that portfolio. So we have to evolve quickly. And I think one of the big areas was around how we work as an organization that isn't now able to see each other every 5 minutes and is becoming more remote and with a larger central team, and perhaps slightly less at the space level of, as a manager of a location, I'm an entrepreneur and I make all the decisions, to we have specialists now in the support team who are going to make some of those decisions on your behalf or collaborate with you, or you will need to take advice from the marketing experts and the sales experts for the better and greater good of the business, being in transition. I think specifically in my context, I was able to contribute in that and helping that mentality change and that slight organizational shift to a scenario now that allows us to be a lot more scalable and has resolved some of those pain points. And that, I think, as you rightly say, I'm not a huge fan of, I'm not very boastful, but I do think that's something I'm quite proud of having worked on.
And this couldn't have been achieved without trust, because you're working in a fragmented space, quite literally. You can't be in all 10 locations at the same time.
So trust becomes really important, right?
Without that, nothing happens. Like, there will be locations you haven't been to this week or even this month. So trust is fundamental. So being able to foster it, to get it, to re-earn it is huge.
And empowerment as well, equally, as you rightly say. You have to trust people and you have to empower them to make decisions, because decisions won't wait for you to get around to it.
But you also work as operations with a lot of people who are non-tech by definition. contractors, construction workers, some, I guess, municipality type people. We talked about the challenges of transferring a skill set from one industry to the other, but the more we speak, the more I realize actually so much of that is what you've done in the past, because hospitality, you're talking to people at various levels of consciousness, but also with people who are not the nicest, people who are, vendors, health and safety people, creme de la crop of like super
like
wealthy
councils,
people.
police.
Yeah, so like the diversity of people you work with. Chefs. Yeah. Any advice on context switching? Because you're here.
It's a good one, actually. And you're right to say that was a skill set from hospitality. You have to have it. And also people from all around the world and all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of language issues as well, in terms of being able to communicate as well, especially in London. It's so diverse as an industry, hospitality. And yes, you have to switch constantly from, even in the moment, within a 1 minute stretch between speaking with 3 guests and 5 members of staff doing 5 different roles. In terms of advice, I don't know. I think you need to be present in the conversations you're having. You need to pitch it right, and you need to think about your audience. And I mean, that's pretty, common sense, I think. But it's being able to apply that, I guess. It's understanding that the conversation you're having with the founder and the conversation you're having with, in my role, a membership assistant who's just joined the business are different audiences, and they'll be looking for different things from you, and you'll need to pitch it right. You need to get it right for the audience to understand what you're trying to communicate and get the level right. I also think it's important to note that that's my responsibility, not theirs, to adjust to me. I need to adjust for them. And I guess I'm quite practiced at it. You get a sense, you develop an EQ for how people communicate and what presses their buttons, and ultimately the goal is to get the best out of the situation, get the best out of the conversation. If you're trying to persuade someone or push something, you have a point you're trying to make, then it's that. And if it's about getting them to open up and trust you and talk to you, then it's that. But it's understanding what you're trying to get out of it, pitching it right, and being present. We talked early on about how you look after yourself physically, mentally, in order to be prepared. And when you realize the scope of the work, operations, membership, sales, working with founders, other managers, peers, entry-level employees, and then external folks, like, it's understandable why you have to show up the way you show up to work, and it's admirable. One last anecdote is the last thing transferable from hospitality. We walked into a cafe a few months ago, and seeing your eyes jump off the walls, that burnt light bulb, that person who's not wearing their apron, that person who's with his back to the customer, the time it took them to give us our change. Even I think you commented about the stickiness of the keypad when we... Only to you quietly, not to the staff.
Yeah, only to me quietly, but an understanding of what excellent looks like in your world, in your role, in your profession is, I think it's huge, and I love seeing it at work life every time I walk in, and I wish you guys all the best. Paul, before we wrap up, anything else you'd want to bring forward or promote?
Not really looking to promote anything. Obviously, please, if you're looking for what we do and want to check Work.life out, I'd love for visitors. We're at work.life on Instagram, and work.life is our website, and you'll find everything there. We've got a really interesting blog. One of the things we haven't talked about so much is our focus on happiness and work happiness, and we're running a really cool podcast series of our own right now on that subject. So some really cool speakers. So would love for anyone to check that out. And just to say, it is an incredible team of people that achieve this. So, credit where it's due. A lot of work from a lot of people goes into what we're lucky enough to have.
Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Tal. Great to see you again.
Likewise, Barry. See you soon.
Took a podcast for us to have a proper catch up.
Yes, it did.
Thank you.